Hi, and welcome to AT&T ThreatTraq for March 26, 2013. This program provides network security highlights, discussion, and countermeasures for cyber threats. I'm joined today by Jim Clausing, David Linsky, and Traci Range, and I'm Dan Rubin. So let's get started and get right into it. And Jim, you've got something about Apple implementing two-factor authentication.
Yeah, a friend of mine pointed this out to me the other day. It appears that Apple is introducing two-factor authentication for their Apple IDs. Google did something similar last year with the Google Authenticator, and now Apple is introducing two-factor authentication for Apple IDs. Basically, go and you have to explicitly enable it for your Apple ID. And when you do, then anytime that you want to authenticate with that Apple ID, they'll send a message to your device, your iPhone or your iPad, with a code that you also enter in addition to your regular password. So I haven't had an opportunity to try it yet, but it's a step in the right direction. And we often talk about weak passwords as being big targets for the bad guys. So I take this as a step in the right direction, although, as I said, I haven't had an opportunity to enable it on any of my devices yet.
Okay, yeah, well, I ran through it this morning right before we started the show, and it's all pretty straightforward. You go to the Apple site, and they've got a couple-step process that you walk through. The first thing, which I thought was great, was they made you upgrade your password to something that you either hadn't used in the past year or was a lot stronger than what you used to use. So I got that upgrade immediately, and it looks like, at least for now, it seems like it's a pretty popular program because they have a couple-day waiting period before you can actually start using the two-factor authentication. By the time the show comes up, it may be gone, but as of right now, I've got to wait at least a couple of days until I can start using the new system.
So this is an optional feature for the Apple IDs and the optional step-up kind of authentication here. I find that very interesting to hear. It's a welcome kind of thing, especially for people who are looking for additional identity security there. I find it very interesting, Dan, that you said you had to go to a stronger password, though, in order to enable this feature, given that, you're already making that whole authentication more secure by adding in that second factor. So I kind of found that pretty interesting. I would have thought just the opposite. If you're going to add in a second factor, you could actually loosen up your password requirements, make it a little easier for your user to remember their password. You get these complex passwords and people forget what they are, and that's an ongoing nightmare for support teams, right? So I would have thought they would have taken the opportunity and lessened that restriction on the password. So very interesting.
I think it makes sense. You can never have too many layers of security, right?
Yeah, and I think with having Apple trudge the path to make it more difficult password, perhaps that'll make it easier for the business to adapt. And hey, if Apple's doing it, and the consumers like it, let's go that route.
And I must say, as a security professional, I prefer also to see those stronger passwords out there. But it's always a fight with the business and balancing security with the ability to do business and not cost a fortune and lock our users out of our services, right?
Yeah, I think another thing too is that considering this is a step that people have to take on their own to improve their security, enabling that two-factor authentication. Going back to what you said before, Dave, I think those are the type of people who probably wouldn't mind being asked for a stronger password. I was surprised that they did, but I didn't have a problem with it.
Right. But, there's nothing to stop people from having that stronger password anyway if they so choose.
Just like the Google's two-factor authentication, it's slightly different. In Google's case, you can generate a list of 10 one-time passwords that you can use if you don't have your device with you. With the Apple one, at the time you set it up, there's a recovery key that gets generated for you that you can use to authenticate if you don't have your device with you. It's not clear to me, since as I said, I haven't tried it out yet, whether that's only good for one use, whether you have to generate another one then once you've used it, or what the deal is on that. But the thing that always is the concern when you go with the two-factor authentication is what happens if you lose your other device or don't have access to it. And so they have thought about it, and they do allow you a way of authenticating at least one time if you don't have the device handy.
And the solution, it does allow you to have multiple devices, obviously, I'm assuming, if you're using or sharing the same Apple ID. Takes provisions into account.
I'm assuming that you can have it send it to multiple devices, but I don't know. I haven't had a chance to try it out yet. So
it looks like it lets you authenticate with multiple devices, so you can use an iPhone or an iPad, and you can say that both of these are trusted devices. I think it's tied to the actual device, not necessarily your Apple ID.
Very good.
Okay.
So anyway, it'll be interesting to see how this works out once we can actually try it out ourselves.
Yeah, I will. I'll let you guys know how it works, so you can talk about it on next week's show.
And then it's also very interesting to see what the adoption rate of that will be, to see how the user community accepts it and embraces it.
You hope as many people as possible sign up for it, but as with any of these things, like Dave said, you have to balance the convenience with the security, and we know how people choose to go sometimes. Time will tell. So, Jim, thanks for bringing that. And next, we're going to move on to a discussion of a program that AT&T has been running for a little while called the AT&T Bug Bounty Program. People who have been watching ThreatTraq up till now will recognize that Dave and Traci are two new faces to the show. Traci, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what your background is, and then why don't you and Dave tell us about AT&T's Bug Bounty Program?
Sure. I am a director at AT&T in charge of securing the cloud and the API program. And Dave is a member on my team, and he's responsible for today running and programming the Bug Bounty program. And the Bug Bounty program is a program that we kicked off in June at the AT&T the Cybersecurity Conference. And the intention was to focus it within the scope of the API program. So the APIs that AT&T is exposing to our external developers, we wanted to expose those, but then we also wanted to allow external developers the ability to report back to us to say, hey, you have a problem with this API, and it has this particular vulnerability. So they would let us know, they would report the vulnerability, and then we would pay them for their finding. The program has since been unofficially and here recently, I guess, semi-officially been exposed to all of AT&T. So any bugs that are found within AT&T, we have the external developers reporting them to us, and we notify our development community and our suppliers, and they go forth and issue the enhancements or the security fixes. And then we, in turn, either put the developers on, the external developers, the reporters, we put them on a Bug Bounty Hall of Fame, and or we give them some money for their findings. It's been quite successful. Been a real explosion of the program in about the November-December time frame. So it's been a lot of fun just seeing what people find and what they report.
Yes, and, an explosion in reporting toward the end of November is just putting it mildly. We got inundated with some reports as we went into the holiday season here, and that continued into the beginning of the new year, we kind of attribute that to the fact that we began paying out on some of these bug reports back in the October time frame, and it was quite amazing to see the impact of, a couple of payments, what that would do to the white hat community and stimulate interest in the program. And the good news is, as you get the reports in, our support teams, there's quite a large support team out there. It's just a couple of bottlenecks in the process. As they remediate some of the issues, that goes and it reduces the number of future reports because, of course, we've tightened up the environment somewhat, right? So we are very happy with the response that we've seen to the program. We've found all kinds of different vulnerabilities within the environment. The most prevalent out there is cross-site scripting. By far, at least half of the vulnerabilities that are out there are cross-site scripting. We don't like to have those kinds of vulnerabilities in the environment. That leaves us open to the ability to, get the user's cookies off of their machine, steal session tokens, and you can even, with cross-site scripting, deface web pages and put up content that was never even meant to be on the page without your user being aware that this stuff is happening. So we like to see that come out of the environment.
So how are you guys prioritizing this avalanche as it comes in? Like, what criteria do you use to figure out which are kind of the first priority for handling it?
We don't prioritize. As they come in, we turn around, we find out who the support team is for the vulnerability, and then we send it on to the support teams. It is up to them to validate the report, because, of course, just because someone says there's something that's broken out there doesn't necessarily mean there is something broken out there. They need to validate the report, and then they need to, look at the severity individually, each individual application, look at the severity, look at their workload. Is it something they can fix quickly? Is it something they have to schedule in, either in a future release or in an upcoming, a lot of times there's a lot of maintenance activity that's out there. Can they fit it into a maintenance thing? Do they need to enhance the code to address the vulnerability? And we leave it up to the application teams to determine how quickly to respond. If they come back and they tell us, we're not going to have this fixed for 6 months, we start turning up the heat. But generally, they've been pretty good about responding, sometimes within minutes, sometimes hours, typically within a couple of weeks.
And with the program, it has underscored it helps the application developers to understand that security is obviously important. So it really has done a good job with raising the awareness with the security, with the developers and our suppliers. So security awareness, application development has been much improved.
Yeah, this program has become proof positive that there are people looking at our sites. They're scanning our sites, looking for holes in the environment. And it's good that we have this program so those holes are reported to us. Otherwise, the bad guys could be exploiting those holes.
So, Dave, you said that the most common vulnerability or possible exploit that people have been finding have been cross-site scripting attacks. Is there a kind of common cause behind those? Is there kind of a best practice that you guys are finding that people can use during development to avoid that kind of vulnerability?
Yes, typically cross-site scripting is a result of a failure to look at user input, the inputs coming at you, whether it be through an input form or through a request coming through on a URL or what have you, and looking for, escaping out any of the special characters, anything that can be misinterpreted by the browser and acted on by the browser and leveraged by the bad guy to do something that wasn't really intended to be done on that site. Sanitize your input is the the shortcut to avoiding cross-site scripting.
Jim, what do you think?
It's a tough one. That people tend to make silly mistakes. We're all human.
We are all human.
Yep. And okay. And Traci, how can people participate in the bug bounty program?
There is, if you go to developer.att.com, in the support page, there is a bug bounty selection that you can choose on. That is the best and most clean way to report a bug, because it'll give you the form of what we are looking for from a reporting standpoint, and it'll come directly to our team.
All right, Traci and Dave, thanks for that. We're going to move on to our next story, which is be careful about what you're posting on Facebook. Jim, you have a little bit more about that?
Yeah, there was a story on the Guardian's website last week that Frank Abagnale, the Catch Me If You Can guy, made a movie. Actually, I think they've made 2 movies on it. He's called the world's greatest con man. He used to pretend to be a pilot to fly and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, for the last 30, 40 years now, since he got caught by the FBI back in the 70s, he's been helping out law enforcement and evaluating security. And in the Guardian, they had a story where he took a look at wondering what kind of things we're putting on Facebook, what kind of vulnerabilities that can lead to. And we've talked about a lot of these things on the show in the past. Kinds of things like just the availability of your date of birth and where you were born, allows an identity thief take that information. They can go look up some additional information, and that may be all they need to steal your identity. So that was just one of the vulnerabilities that he was pointing out.
Oh yeah, Jim, I got to tell you, half the sites out there, all you really need to know is what city were you born in, and an email address, and they'll reset your password for you. I could see how that would be a huge issue with Facebook. I've always worried about Facebook from that perspective and the information that's available out there.
Yeah, well, and it's not just Facebook. It's a lot of the social network kinds of sites. The idea is, to help you connect with colleagues and friends, and when you're connecting back with folks you haven't seen in 30 years, be sure it's the right person. They want some of this information, but how much of it do you give up? It's been something that I've fought with my kids all along since they got started, about how much stuff they're putting on out there on the internet.
Kids love to post everything, don't they?
Well, and one of the things that I found that he said that was very interesting was just, there's a profile that can be created based upon the things that you like. And there's so many emotional ties to the things that you like. You like the military arm that your cousin is in, or you like a few things he wrote lately is you like this recipe or that recipe, but obviously that's not as intuitive, but it really is just, you like this children's hospital or that organization. There's such an emotional tie to it that you do get wound up and caught into it. You don't realize the ramifications of how liking that political candidate versus that whatever really does help profile you as a person.
Worse than that, there was a research paper out of a university just in the last couple of weeks that said that based on likes, they were with a high degree of accuracy able to predict things like sexual orientation and political use, and it was pretty scary, actually.
Right.
And it's an interesting thing to think about, too, because it's not just a matter of somebody being able to maybe go and try and guess your security passwords, but you're also setting yourself up to be spearphished. I mean, if you're somebody in a position where you have data that somebody wants to get at, if your Facebook controls aren't set properly, or not even Facebook specifically, but any other social network, you can build a pretty convincing profile and probably put together a pretty convincing spear-phishing email to try and target somebody who you really want to get based on nothing other than reading their Facebook page. Okay. And I don't think that people really think about that. They think about the embarrassment. They think about the things, like you said, Jim, like things following them around to job interviews. But you got to be aware that you make yourself a target, especially if you're somebody worth targeting.
Yeah, well, and LinkedIn is one that is used a lot for targeted spear phishing by gathering, your connections on there, who you know, company you work for. All of these social networks expose a lot more about you than you probably realize.
Yeah, and again, it's not necessarily how Facebook sets anything up or how LinkedIn sets anything up. It's about how you specifically choose to share your information. It's not Facebook or LinkedIn's fault if you're the one who's telling the world things that the world probably doesn't need to know. It's yours, and that's a responsibility that you have to keep in mind when you're putting your profiles together.
Yeah, it's definitely a user beware, and obviously, with having children, teenagers, and above, you're trying to teach them, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and unfortunately, they're of such a mindset and an environment where that's just completely acceptable to them. So you just hope that you do the best that you can to train them and teach them with the privacy settings and the behavior and what have you.
Right. As with everything else, the kids always know better than the adults, right?
And let's not just put this on kids, because I bet in a large number of cases that there are kids who know a lot more about protecting themselves than the older people who should know better as well.
And so I know there's plenty of older...
Everyone to keep in mind.
Right. There's plenty of older people who are just as guilty of, living their life on the social network, right? Mm. So everything you put out there can and will be used against you at some point, probably.
Yeah, and that's always a good, timely reminder, and I think that's what this Guardian story of the Frank Abagnale story shows us, is that you can never have too frequent reminders about being careful about the information that you put out to the world.
Agreed.
All right, good. And on that, let's go to our next story, which is the Internet Weather Report. Jim, what do you have for us?
Thanks. Yeah, there's one report that I wanted to take a look at this week in particular that is showing some traffic, and I'm not sure exactly what it's all about. It's scanning on TCP port 1234. This is the InfoSeek search agent, but it's also used by some malware for backdoors and that kind of thing. We've seen in the last week a couple of little spikes here. We saw one on the 20th and one on the 21st yesterday. The attackers seem to be spread out all over the place, but they primarily seem to be targeting a particular network in India. So it's a little odd. It doesn't look like sufficient traffic to actually be a denial of service attack, but I'm not sure why all of these folks are scanning that one particular network. So just some unusual activity, and again, I'm not entirely sure what it is that we're seeing there.
What would it take to kind of get a good grasp of what the cause is? Do you have to see this pattern repeated over a longer period of time? What would be the kind of next steps that you guys are going to go through to figure out what's causing it, if any at all?
For now, just keep an eye on it. If it starts to spread, if they start scanning beyond this network, then then it's something to be, looking at more closely. As I said, it from the volume that we're seeing, doesn't look like it's a denial of service attack, which, if it was a denial of service attack, then we'd, there's things that the end user, the target, and the victim and their ISP can do to defend themselves against that. For the time being, I think we'll just keep an eye on it. Maybe some of the folks who do this kind of analysis within our team on a more regular basis have some other things they'd do.
Yeah, and of course, I'm sure if anything else comes up, we'll be talking about it next week and the week after on the Internet Weather Report as well. So for those of you who are concerned, you keep on watching every week, and if anything significant pops up, I'm sure we'll have something to say.
Yeah, and if you see some of this weird scanning start to show up on your own network, capture the packets and take a look at them and, yourself more closely or let us know.
So, Jim, at what level of activity where you start seeing this do you start taking action, proactive action?
Well, if it's directed against our own enterprise, obviously we'll take action as soon as it starts to impact us. If it's hitting customers, when we see it, we'll inform them if they're DDoS customers. At the DDoS defenses when they request that. But mostly, what we're in my group, what we're interested in is, what are the trends, and is it reaching the point where it's starting to affect our ability as a service provider to provide service?
And once it gets there, you start sounding the alarms, right?
Yeah. And next we have our usual pie chart of the top 10 most probed ports. And this week is pretty much what has become our standard here. Absolutely nothing new in this one. TCP 445 is the most probed. 16464 UDP, 16471 UDP, the zero access, Microsoft SQL, SSH, desktop, Telnet, and HTTP. So really nothing unusual this week, the ones that we've come to expect. Top 10 most sources probing is also pretty much the same as we see most weeks. Again, far and away the largest is TCP 445, zero access. The one sort of unusual one, although we see it show up time to time, is this 27015 UDP, and that's just a gaming, that's, I believe, Half-Life gaming traffic. So nothing really unusual in our pie charts this week at all.
Okay. All right. Well, Jim, thank you for that. If anything unusual pops up, like always, we do the Internet Weather Report every week, making sure nothing really strange is going on, but make sure to check back every week to see what's happening on the AT&T network. So next, we're going to go to our new-ish segment that has quickly become a fan favorite called Top Security Concerns for the Week, where everybody gets 1 minute to talk about the things that are on top of mind security-wise for them. Jim, what's your top security concern for the week?
Mine is end-user patching. Over the last few years, we've seen the OS folks get better, and a lot of applications get better at automatically updating, adding automatic update capabilities, and that helps quite a bit. But what about those applications that don't automatically update? And how do the users even know when they need to update, when a new version is out? In enterprise environments, that can be handled probably a little easier. You have some central management. You can push the updates out to the clients. But in smaller companies, the mom and pop shops, the SOHO environments, and the home users, how do you even know that an application has been updated? For my parents, I put an application on their computers that is supposed to keep track of that. But every time I go visit them, I notice that the little icon there is not green; it's yellow or red, meaning there are some that the application didn't automatically update, and my parents didn't know to update. So, it's something that I worry about.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, at least not only on your computers and your applications that you have on your PCs, but also on mobile devices too. There are often software and OS patches available that people not necessarily know about. I know, fortunately for us, AT&T sends messages to users of specific mobile devices when OS patches are available, but there are always updates that people aren't necessarily aware of, things like apps as well, that you have to keep aware of.
Yeah, and if you got the apps through the, iTunes, or the Google Play Store, those actually, they're pretty good about pushing the updates out to the devices. But if you got it someplace else, we talk about how to be leery of those alternate markets anyway. But if it isn't in the normal app store where the updates get pushed to you on a regular basis, how do you know?
And so then that is the question, Jim. What do you think is the best way to go about making sure people patch their devices and their computers, given that everybody's computing environment has grown significantly over the past few years as more people get smartphones and tablets and other mobile devices, and like we said, other than OS updates that you get updates for, how do you make sure that people are aware when patches become available?
Well, that's a hard one. As I said, in the case of like my parents or my wife and daughter, on their laptops, there are a couple of applications out there designed for the consumer to keep track of where they're running the latest version of the applications. With the mobile devices, if you stick with the reputable app marketplaces, those get pushed to you on a fairly regular basis. With some of the other OSs, my Linux boxes, as long as I'm using packages from a reputable repository, I can have a cron job that updates those every night. But if I built it from source, then it's up to me to keep track of whether I have to go back to a website or be on a mailing list to keep track of when the new patches come out. And
then you have to be willing to do that in the first place. It's a big list that you rattled off there that other people would have to be aware of, and not just people like you guys.
Yeah, it's a hard problem.
I think from your ordinary user, it's an ugly housekeeping routine that they have to just keep on top of, and it's just not something pleasant. So a lot of people probably just ignore it.
Right. And I got to say, I, always try and keep on top of these updates, but, a lot of times I'll go in and I'll start updating, and I get that dreaded, this whatever is trying to push, install a program, and then it says it's from an unverified source, and that always makes me nervous. You click on the get details, and, most people, you'll see who it's from, assuming it's not an impersonated kind of thing, but, you try and do the right thing, and then you get these kinds of messages, and then you say, what should I do?
I'll tell you what, why don't we have our viewers get in on the action here? You guys can email us at threattrack@list.att.com with your ideas about ways that we can keep people informed about software updates and making sure that their security patches are up to date in cases where you don't necessarily get automatic reminders. You could also tell us on Twitter as well. We're at AT&T ThreatTraq. Why don't we move on? Jim, thanks for that concern. My top concern this week, it kind of goes along with what Jim's talking about, is just general overall mobile device security. And we talk every week about how the threat environment for mobile devices is growing, whether it's malware in Android apps or exploits that people find on other operating systems like iOS. And I keep thinking about how we're going to keep ourselves protected, not just the people who do security, but everybody, as the malicious actors move more towards mobile devices. I'm very concerned about what people are going to do to keep themselves protected. I mean, I know AT&T recommends using multiple levels on-device security, network-based security, and we've got a couple of programs in place to monitor threats, but I'm very concerned about how the average user is going to keep their mobile device protected as they become stronger targets. And when you think about it, I think that even though it's not perfect, a lot of people have gotten the message about protecting their PCs. So there's antivirus software that almost everyone installs. If you run Windows machines, you have Microsoft Security Suite, which does a reasonably good job, and then you can always supplement it with other antivirus. But I don't think that people are as knowledgeable about the tools that they have available to them, if there are tools available to them, for these new computing devices, and if you want to call them post-PC devices or whatever you want to call them.
It's something that we in the security industry need to give some thought to as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. We certainly have plenty of experience in the area. We just need to, work with the lessons we've learned from the PC era and apply them to the future.
And that's our show for today. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can email us at threattrack@list.att.com. That's THREATTRAQ@list.att.com. You can also find us on Twitter. Follow the username @ThreatTraq. Video for the show is available at att.com/ThreatTraq and on YouTube. You can also subscribe to our audio-only feed on iTunes and listen to it when you're driving to and from work or when you're stuck in a basement and administering a server and have nothing to keep you company but an audio player. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, first-timers, Dave and Traci. You guys did a great job. Jim, thank you as always. We'll be back next week with a new episode of AT&T ThreatTraq. Until then, keep your network safe.